Welcome to the Humble Hoof podcast. My name is Alicia Harlov. This is a podcast for both horse owners and hoof care professionals, offering discussions into various philosophies on the health of the hoof and soundness of your horse. Please check us out on Facebook or at thehumblehoof.com.
Trying to choose the right supplements for the right horses often feels like a chore, and you have enough chores as it is. Fortunately, there's Equithrive, whose mission is to make this whole nutrition equation easier on you and much more beneficial to your horses. Equithrive's lineup of pelleted supplements are developed with care, backed by science, and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Not to mention picky eater approved. Whether you need advanced joint care for your equine athlete, gut, or metabolic support, Equithrive is your one-stop shop for feed tub fortification. Do your horses and yourself a favor and visit equithrive.com. Use the promo code HumbleHoof and get 20% off your first order, plus free and fast shipping nationwide. Don't forget to use HumbleHoof, all one word, to get 20% off your first order at equithrive.com.
A special thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Cavallo. For our Humble Hoof listeners, they are offering 15% off their Cavallo Trek hoof boots using the coupon code HRN at checkout. The Trek is the world's most popular and versatile hoof boot and Cavallo's toughest trail boot, while also doubling as an option for therapy or rehab. The front closure system makes it easily adaptable to various hoof shapes, and TPU upper design allows for maximum strength while minimizing weight for the comfort and ease of movement for your horse. These are recommended by vets and trainers and also loved as transport boots by barrel racers, show jumpers, dressage riders, and everyone in between. Again, for 15% off a pair of Treks, use the code HRN at checkout at cavallo-inc.com. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you've probably heard me kind of deep dive a little bit into the equine gut microbiome. I've been really interested in how I can help horses grow healthier feet here on the property and the hoof rehab facility we have. And I feel like the microbiome and the health of the microbiome is sort of the missing link that I have been looking for. So when I was looking for an option for more forage diversity in the diet, I came across sand fawn pellets. And I, have since incorporated it, just trying to help the microbiome. It's fairly new, so I don't know that I've seen changes yet. But I reached out to the owner of the company that makes the sand fawn pellets that I buy, Mary Hartman, and I wanted to talk to her about her journey into nutrition to help improve the health of horses, and what that looks like in terms of a microbiome, and what are some practical ways that we can not only look for symptoms that there's an issue, but improve our horse's health. So I met her at Equine Fair in Massachusetts this year and asked her if she'd be on the podcast, and she agreed, and we were able to connect.
So anyway, this will be fun. This will be really fun. I wanted to come and hang out with you a little bit more and talk to you a little bit more and actually ask you if this year we're going to be doing a metabolic feed for horses. So it'll be something that we're hoping we could help reduce the symptoms by health in their systems. And some of those horses need a higher level of certain minerals, like higher levels of zinc, higher levels of copper. They just do. And so I thought, it'd be fun to run the formulation by Alicia to say, hey, what do you think for these horses for feet health in the metabolic horse? So I just didn't have a chance to sit down with you during Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah, I know. And I love that idea. And that's something, I run a hoof rehab facility. So something that I'm always looking for is metabolic safe feed, because even if the horses aren't diagnosed metabolic here, I feed them as if they are, just to reduce any possible risk of laminitis, because they already have hoof issues. So I don't want to contribute to that at all. And
right.
I'm always, I read ingredients. I scour through the guaranteed analysis. So that's something that I'm always focused on here. But yeah, I was thinking that we could talk a little bit about your journey into, your journey from horses into being interested in nutrition. And then also we can talk about anything. Really, I'm pretty open, but I'd love to talk about the gut microbiome, if you'd be interested,
Yeah.
like, forage diversity or whatever,
No, I think that's important. The microbiome is really, that's kind of where we live here. I mean, we lived with the chia supplements, but really the microbiome is really where we live, and the microbiome is really what the feed was developed for, was to feed the microbiome. And so, no, I would love to talk about that, because people have, it's a mixed bag, and there's mixed information out there. Is it a new area of study? Some vets will say, yes, we don't know enough, and others say, no, it's been around for a while. It's been around a very long time. So I think it's kind of fun to talk about. I really do. And it also leads into, that's how the food was developed around the microbiome of horses. So it wasn't developed to make them shiny. It was developed to provide them with bioavailable nutrition, but it was also developed with the microbiome in mind, because if you don't maintain the microbiome, none of the rest of it matters.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that, I've been in hoof care for about 10 years now, which in the grand scheme of the horse world, I know isn't that long, but I've been really focused on nutrition in the hoof in that time. And something that I feel like has been the missing piece has been the gut, because I have horses that are on the most perfect diet in the entire world. And, we're doing everything right. And I don't see an improvement in their feet until this year when I started focusing on the gut more. And I really think there's a lot to be said there. But yeah. And I mean, why don't we back up a little bit, and why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey into equine nutrition?
Okay. So my journey into equine nutrition started in 2017. I've always had a strong affinity for animals. And my whole life, I've loved horses. We couldn't afford one when I was little, so I didn't come into having one until I was older. And it just seemed like the horses today were falling apart all the time, more than I ever remembered my friends' horses falling apart when I was a little kid. And the solutions or the offerings from the veterinary world, and people were either supplements or medications. And that got really expensive. It was just this never-ending loop of medications or supplements, and I didn't really see results that I wanted. And so after studying biochemistry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I just decided one day that I was going to take a look at more holistic approaches and try to create a supplement that would support this one particular mare's gastrointestinal health after she'd been through a pretty stressful situation. And that led me into veterinary journals and NIH articles and NCBI articles online, and just really studying equine nutrition, gastrointestinal tract, and health in horses. And it opened up a whole new world of fascination for me. I became very passionate and fascinated by all of it. It also was where I created my first supplements for my horse based on chia seeds, which are little nutritional powerhouses. They're nature's little miracles. And just built on top of that by finding superfoods that would cause a functional change in the horse's body, or could support particular systems. And in this particular instance, it was gastrointestinal health and immunity. It was the spirulina chia with a high grade of manuka honey. And that stuff to this day is our top seller, and it does really remarkable things. So I started out with a need, really. I started with a need, a love of my horse, and no place that I could turn to where I felt that need was being addressed appropriately. So I created what I wanted. I created what I felt she needed. And it turned out it worked great. So here I am in 2024, and we've not only got a complete line of chia supplements for horses that were each one developed for a particular animal that had a particular problem that we were trying to address using superfoods. And from there, taking a look into the microbiome, because that is so important for the gastrointestinal health of the horse, and creating forages and a forage line based on sainfoin hay.
Awesome. Yeah. And I actually feed the sainfoin, and I mean, the horses love it. It seems like
they do.
It's great. And I really just started it like 6 weeks ago. So I'm still kind of, I'm not 100% sure I can talk about, changes yet, but I know that they like it and they're eating it. And that in itself is amazing because I have had a hard time in the past getting horses to get all their supplements in them with other forage-based carrier feeds because, they don't want to eat the minerals in most things. So that's been really cool.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, horses love sainfoin, and so it's a very old forage, very ancient forage. We just forgot about it, but I read about all of its wonderful properties for any animal. It's not just good for horses, but it's good for cows, camels. We feed some African cow who's a actor
Oh,
at the
wow.
Bronx. In Pennsylvania, at Sight and Sound Theater. So we feed all sorts of animals. So sainfoin is a really, really great forage to add into and add diversity to the diet of any animal, but we use it for horses.
Yeah. And so I guess, for owners, kind of giving them a little bit of backstory, can you give any insight into like some symptoms they might see if their horse is having issues with the gut other than the obvious ones in terms of like, you see a change in their manure or something, but is there something else that they might notice that could point out?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. Horses are actually really good communicators. They're wonderful communicators. I often think that, they're great communicators. We just tend to be, some of us, kind of poor listeners, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we chalk a lot of things up to, well, behavioral things, and he's naughty, when that's not necessarily the case. So nutritional impacts that I've seen that have been completely missed by the veterinary world would be right hind lameness. So if you have a horse and that horse is right hind lame and you can't figure out what is going on with that because there isn't an area of soreness, there isn't any area when you palpate it, you don't find anything chiropractically, you don't find anything with any sort of imaging. One of the things to start looking for would be hindgut ulcers or hindgut acidosis, because when you think about where the hindgut sits, when they move that right leg forward, the right hind forward, it pushes on their hindgut. So if you have acidosis and you've got areas of inflammation in the hindgut there, and you move that, it's going to be painful for the horse. So they're going to short step or they're going to swing their leg in. So you might see lameness, right hind lameness, that's otherwise you can't seem to get a diagnosis on. Crabby horses, we've all seen crabby horses, and you can test to see whether or not they potentially or probably have ulcers. You can do scoping, of course, and if you believe that your horse does, I actually recommend that you call your vet and you scope before you treat. But you can put your hand up close to the withers. If they quiver, and put it down behind their front leg toward their shoulder, they might quiver. And if you go to touch their belly right in front of their hind leg, they might quiver and pin their ears. And those are usually pretty good signs that the horse has got something going on in the gut. We have had horses who have been truly anorexic. There's a YouTube video under StableFeed's YouTube for Ashlyn Michael and her horse Theo. And Theo he's a incredibly talented horse. He's doing stadium jumping. Prior to that, he did eventing. He's one of those guys that could probably jump over a pickup truck from a standstill, and he would enjoy it too. But he was anorexic, and he'd lose 200 pounds on the trailer going to shows, and they could not figure out what was going on with him. And Ashlyn, in frustration and just kind of panicked, called our office and said, I don't know what to do. We've done everything. We've done medications. I can't get him to eat. So we tested his microbiome. We just sent her a test kit. So you just pull some poop, and they do RNA analysis of that to see what the bacteria are. A horse should have anywhere from 850 to 1,500 different species of bacteria, according to what we know right now. And he had 67.
Wow.
So, he didn't feel good. His stomach was upset. His stomach was probably sore. She was putting groceries in. He wasn't able to digest it and use the nutrition that she was giving to him. And so it showed up in him losing weight on the trailer, and it showed up as anorexia. So those are things where people will try, and they'll throw groceries at a horse and just think that he's just skinny and he's got a high metabolism. That may not be the case. And picky horses may have micronutrient deficiencies. Picky horses may actually have things going on in their gastrointestinal tract that have nothing to do with whether they do or don't like what you're putting in front of them. It just hurts to eat. So they'd rather not. And in their world, I think sometimes they associate the pain in their stomach with whatever's in their food bucket.
And is that with just like hard feed, or do you see them go off their hay too?
We've seen some horses go off hay as well. And then the owners try different types of hay, and they soak the hay. They do all sorts of things to try to get them to eat hay. So, it can happen with anything that the horse is putting in. So it's more common, though, with concentrates than it is with hay.
Yeah, that makes
But we've
sense.
seen both here. Yeah.
I would love to hear a little bit more about that test kit that you were talking about. And I think, like 10 years ago, I heard about kits that were available in the UK, but they weren't in the United States. And I know they were sort of on like the fringe of research, like sort of on like the very edge of it. And I think that now it is becoming more common. I know like Mad Barn in Canada was doing a lot of study of like manure and things like that. And I think it's becoming more accepted that there is validity in that. I know that you mentioned you were looking at the RNA analysis. Can you dive a little bit more into that?
Sure, yeah. So Carol Hughes is the woman with Equinobiome out in the UK. She's a microbiologist, and she's been studying the equine microbiome for at least 2 decades, working with universities. Carol, I think, has the world's largest database of information on the equine microbiome. And I worked with her and corresponded with her, and for a number of years carried her test kits here in the U.S. to make those available for horse owners here, and used those test kits on my own horses when I was trying to educate myself on what those tests could show us, what they couldn't show us, and what the microbiome in the horse looked like, right? And in particular, what the microbiome of my horses looked like. In the beginning, there were a lot of people who kind of poo-pooed what she was doing. But when you consider that work on the microbiome, I mean, really intensive work on the microbiome has been happening since the 700s. But in the 1840s, we started doing fecal transplants on pediatric patients when doctors realized that they could improve the health of babies that were born sick by improving their microbiome. So this really isn't new information. What's really new is our ability to take a deeper look into the microbiome, right? So that part of it is newer, but we've known for hundreds of years now that the microbiome is a really important aspect, plays a really important role in our health and the health of animals. So I worked with Carol on that and made those available, and have continued to do the microbiome research where we've gone out and we've studied wild horse microbiomes. We're working with animal biome here in the United States instead of Equinobiome, only because it's so much easier to get a poop sample and move it across to California than it is across the pond to Great Britain.
Right.
And through those tests, the results, and through all of the analysis that we can get, we do quite a bit of work with a lot of horses, several horses every day, honestly, that are quite sick, and try to figure out where the imbalance is. And once we figure out where the imbalance is, we can take prebiotic foods that research has shown particular bacteria in the microbiome either like or don't like. And so you can impact the microbiome. You can raise levels of bacteria and you can lower levels of bacteria based on what you're feeding the horse. So for me, it's absolutely fascinating, and it is, I think, actually the single most important part of the horse's system to keep healthy, because it regulates everything.
Right.
The microbiome literally regulates everything. 85% of your horse's immunity is located in the microbiome. The neurotransmitters that send signals to the brain and back, that's in the microbiome. The the production of postbiotics that the horse needs to maintain health, like L-butyrate production or short-chain fatty acids. That's all the job of the bacteria and the fungi and things in the microbiome. So when we feed horses, for me, feeding horses became less about, are they getting enough vitamin A? Are they getting enough protein? Are they getting enough of this nutrient and that nutrient? And while all that's important, I started to take a look and say, through these tests, are we feeding the bacteria enough so that my boy can lay down L-butyrate and use that to keep his mucosal lining healthy in his gastrointestinal tract and avoid ulcers? So it's so the microbiome test is pretty simple. In the kit you get a pair of tweezers, a pair of gloves, and a little test tube, and you literally take fresh poop, you open it up, you grab samples of that poop from several nuggets from the inside, put it into the test tube, seal it up, shake it, drop it in the mailbox, and about 10 days later, you get a report that's had eyes on from microbiologists at the microbiology labs for animal biome that tells you what the species that they're seeing are in your horse's microbiome, the ones that they're looking for, and what those levels are. If you have purchased the test kit either through them or through us, it doesn't matter. You have the opportunity then to sign up for a consult, which is free. And we do those consults. We have more experience with horses than Animal Biome does. They do dogs and cats predominantly, so they're just new in the horse world. And so we'll take a look and we will either see an area where you can improve your horse's microbial balance, or in a lot of cases, the horses look great and there really isn't anything that we would recommend that the horse owner does differently for their horse.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know that you started, or maybe not started, but I know that you had the chia supplements first. It seemed like, right? I don't want to misspeak.
Right, I did. That's
okay.
that's what I did for my horse was that. But when you do the deep dive into equine nutrition, and especially because I was already looking at Carol Hughes' work, for me, I had to include the microbiome in that deep dive for equine nutrition. And part of it, Alicia, is because, when you're reading about it, and you can pull up almost any magazine on equine health, right, and diet, and you will undoubtedly find someone in there, an expert, and I should say I'm not a vet, I'm not even an equine nutritionist, but I've done probably more work in looking at this than a lot of equine nutritionists have done. But when you start to read this, you'll undoubtedly hear or read something that says horses are increasingly metabolic or increasingly obese or increasingly something because of what we feed them. So I read that over and over and over again. And so the answer that we've gotten, or the response we've gotten to this, the answer from feed companies, is to give us supplements. What you're feeding your horse is making them sick, so here's a supplement. And that doesn't make sense to me. What I thought was, well, if what we're feeding them is making them sick, then we should change the feed. The feed needs to change.
Right.
And that was where the dive into microbiome, that's where I found the word sainfoin, which I'd never heard of before, and started looking at building a horse feed. I started talking to equine nutritionists and veterinarians who had did PhDs then in equine nutrition, and feed scientists, real experts on this, started talking with them and saying, if the problem is the feed, then I'd like to make a feed that can reverse those problems or doesn't create those problems. And here's what I was thinking. And it was basically, instead of using industrial waste for food, it was using food, horse-safe food that was bioavailable to the horse. And that was the genesis of all of this, was the genesis of my feed line. So, one thing that I found, and this is probably the most disturbing thing, but I think it's interesting for people should know, is the real growth in food for horses, pelletized and ultra-processed food for horses, didn't really start until the 1970s. You know, when I was a kid, horses ate out in the pasture with cows. Maybe they got some oats and even a little corn, and they were good. They did great. They seemed to do really, really great with that. But then we started to see bags of ultra processed horse feeds. You know, he had dog chows, and now he had horse chow. And it turned out when I was doing the research that I was reading one nutritionist blog, and she has since passed away, but she was talking about the 1972 Hazardous Waste Recycling and Relabeling Act. So when Richard Nixon was in office, he created the EPA. He signed the EPA into existence to stop the dumping of hazardous materials into the ground and into the waterways in the United States. So it was actually a really responsible and good organization to start. We really needed somebody to watch and make sure that that was stopping. But as part of that, companies were going to have to pay to dispose of their hazardous waste. And at that time, the big feed companies were processing their reprocessing grains after they made food for human beings. They would take the waste and they would create food for cows, pigs, and chickens, those animals that hit our food tables. And then whatever was left was hazardous waste, and they were going to now have to pay to dispose of it. And if you stop and you just consider the sheer volume of what that must be, right? It had to be quite a bit. So they're the ones who went into the labs and did the research to find out, how can you clean that hazardous waste? What are the levels of toxicity that animals that we don't eat, horses and dogs predominantly, can tolerate and still pull the nutrients from this garbage? And can we can we use that waste in food for them instead of paying to dispose of it? So they figured out the toxicity levels. They figured out, more about how much nutrition was left in some of this food. Would it be useful to these animals? Could they digest it? All of the questions that you would naturally want to ask if you were going to look at creating a food out of anything. And it turned out that, the animals could eat it, they could clean it, they could use heat and chemical additives that would not be toxic, and they could reprocess this and make it into feed for horses and dogs. So that was pretty much the genesis of a lot of horse feed. It wasn't created for the health of the horses, and it wasn't created because the horses had to have this. It was created so that industry could avoid paying to dispose of their industrial waste. Mm-hmm. It's not something that most people are aware of. And, and at the time, honestly, because nobody was really spraying a lot of things. When I was a kid, we lived on a farm. You didn't spray Roundup. I think atrazine was one of the newer things. Maybe some people in our area used it. We just couldn't afford it on our farm, so we didn't do any of that. So there were no chemical residues. There were none of these things. Nothing was genetically modified. So it worked, right? It was okay to do this. We didn't see horses becoming metabolic. We didn't see any of the disease processes that we see now starting up. That didn't start until we really started using a lot of these agricultural chemicals, which are now applied toward the end of the life cycle of these crops. And those residues end up in the environment. They end up in the pastures. They end up in the water. They end up in the food. And the consequence is ill health.
Yeah, and actually I had a podcast episode with Elizabeth Hilborn, and she wrote a book called Restoring Eden, and that had a lot of information on Roundup and pesticides causing issues.
Well, yeah, and if you, because of course I had to look, it's well, how could that cause a problem? So then you have to read, right? You have to figure out, what does that do? It kills the weed, but it's how it kills the weed. One of the things that it does that's so interesting too, and that is it walls off or chelates away the plant's ability to absorb and utilize manganese. Plants don't need a lot of manganese, but they need a little bit of manganese. We all need manganese, but the effect of that is that it prevents the plant from then utilizing 13 other key nutrients. And since the plant can't utilize those nutrients, the plant dies. So you think about that, and you think about feeding that, putting something or spraying that in your pastures or feeds that might have that, because they're sourcing large quantities of some of these crops that are heavily sprayed. If it walls off the manganese and your horse is eating it or you're eating it, those chemicals last quite a long time, and would want to know that it's not doing the same thing in the bodies, that we're not walling off manganese and preventing animals or humans from being able to get useful nutrition. We know that those things impact the microbiome, that Roundup glyphosate immediately kills bifidobacteria. We seldom see healthy bifidobacter numbers in horses who get a microbiome test. Usually there are none in the microbiome testing that we do. So there's it's an interesting topic. It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to the microbiome.
Right. And so you were talking about how when you were researching that the sainfoin came up, and I would love to talk a little bit about it because, it's my understanding that it's a legume and not a grass. And so,
right.
Like I said, I'm feeding it to the horses at my facility, but historically I've been, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I've been kind of scared of legumes because alfalfa can make some horses footsore. And obviously my whole career is trying to not make horses footsore. And I haven't seen that with the sainfoin, but is there any concern that horses process legumes differently than grass, or do you have any insight into that?
So I've not seen horses get footsore eating sainfoin. We haven't had that. And we've got a lot of horses eating sainfoin now. We did have one horse get footsore when the horse was eating sainfoin and was put out on pasture, and that horse had a history of laminitis. So I would speculate that it was probably the grass, spring grasses, more than it was the sainfoin. However, I would also say that every horse is an individual, and every horse's body processes things differently. So is it possible that it could cause a horse to get footsore? Absolutely, but we haven't seen it. It's a legume. It's in the same family, but it's very different from alfalfa. And the key difference between sainfoin and alfalfa is that sainfoin's got a higher tannin level than alfalfa. That higher tannin level gives it properties that are beneficial to the animals that eat it. It's non-gas producing. So horses who get gas colic, cattle, you cannot graze cows on alfalfa all day, every day. They will bloat and it'll kill them. But you can graze cattle, you can graze animals on sainfoin. I would not graze horses on it. I get asked this question a lot. Can I plant it in a pasture and graze my horses on it? I wouldn't do that because it's such a bioavailable, the protein content is so good in that, you'd probably create fat horses. So we use sainfoin as an additive, as a way to diversify the forage in the diet, bring nutrients to the horse that they won't get just eating the regular grasses and other things that we're giving them in their diet. Because diversity, I think, is key. Diversity is what the microbiome thrives on, and so that's how we use the sainfoin. It's the tannins also inhibit parasites. So electron microscopes have been looking at parasites that have come out of cattle and out of horses when they've been eating sainfoin, and they're all pitted and dead. So it creates an inhospitable environment for parasites, which is really wonderful because a lot of the wormers are no longer all that effective as parasites have become acclimated to them. So sainfoin is really a great way to help support the elimination or the reduction in parasite load in horses. So they love it. Horses love it. Its calcium and phosphorus levels are not the same as alfalfa. It's balanced in sainfoin. I know there were a lot of worries about too much calcium in alfalfa. We don't have that with sainfoin. So while it's a legume, it's very different in its constituent properties and the way that it acts in an animal.
That's great. And so what does it do for the gut? Like you were saying that's something that you came across. right?
Yes. Yeah. So it is. I came across it because of those tannin levels. It's a little bit like I don't know, like witch hazel or rubbing alcohol, where you have something that's got an astringent quality. So, you'll take a alcohol swab if somebody's bleeding and you'll apply that to it and it'll stop bleeding, right? They'll clean it. If you give blood or something, they swab that with alcohol, they wrap it up and it will help stem bleeding. It's anti-inflammatory. The tannins are anti-inflammatory, and because the tannins protect the protein, protect the food going through the gastrointestinal tract, it brings anti-inflammatory properties all the way through until it's digested. So um, you have one thing that reduces inflammation, and then you have hemostatic qualities that help stem bleeding. So if you have bleeding ulcers and sores, it probably feels pretty good for the horses to eat a little bit of sainfoin.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I like that you mentioned the diversity, because that's something that I've had a handful of different people that I've interviewed for the podcast all mention, that the importance of the diversity for gut health, and how, it's, having the horse eat the same thing day in and day out for so many years might contribute to why, if you get a new load of hay, they colic because, or, whatever, because their gut's not used to having a different thing in it.
Right. Their microbiome adapts to what you're giving them. Their microbiome, I mean, again, it all goes back to that. The microbiome will function in that environment. So, but you want to have species abundance and a lot of diversity in there. You want to just maintain that in them to maintain immune health, to maintain their adrenal health, to maintain all of the active body systems. You really want to have a really nice diversity in the microbiome. And so the more diversity you can have in the horse's diet, I personally think the healthier the horse will be, because the microbiome is healthy. And that's what we do in the Seasons Biome blend of food. Is we have a base pellet that's nutrient dense. It's about 100 times more bioavailable to the horse than any other food on the market, which means they absorb the nutrients from the food that we're giving them better than they do other foods that would be, say, hulls of plants and that. It doesn't mean that it's low fiber, because it isn't. It is a high fiber food. But what I wanted to do when I formulated it is I wanted to be able to provide the horse with a broad spectrum of macro and micronutrients that you can only get from food, right? You can get vitamin A, and you can feed vitamin A to your horse. You can feed vitamin A palmitate. You can feed all sorts of different types of vitamin A. But feeding vitamin A is a very different thing than feeding a carrot, because the carrot has beta carotene, which the horse will turn into vitamin A, but it's got a whole bunch of other things too, right? So it's never just the carrot. And so that was how I looked at the food, is in order to get vitamin E and hit vitamin E targets, what can I use for a food? Well, that's why we have baby wheatgrass, where wheatgrass is harvested between 13 and 16 days when the plant first bifurcates, because that's when the nutrition is highest in wheatgrass. And it's loaded with phytonutrients. So we take that and we use that in the feed, and that's what we use to pull vitamin E for the horses. And with that, they get a whole lot of other things. So we have this nutrient-dense base pellet. And in order to feed the microbiome, then we added in herbal inclusions. So we have herbal inclusions that go right into the pellet so you get this nutrient-dense pellet, and now you have these herbal inclusions. These are non-digestible plant fibers. They are not there for nutrition. They don't change the nutritional analysis, and it's not because there's not enough of them, because there are. It's because they just don't have a meaningful impact with nutrition, but that's not their purpose for being there. The purpose for being there is because they will have constituent properties that bacteria like, and bacteria will use to create another postbiotic that can support various systems in the horse, like for instance, would be dandelion root and dandelion leaf. They are known for being really good for the liver. So when horses in the fall are molting and they're getting ready for the winter, their liver and their kidneys are working really, really hard, right? And their body metabolism is slowing because they're impacted by their circadian rhythm, and we have shorter daytime periods. So all of this is going on inside the body, and we need to stop and think about that and understand that the liver and kidney are working harder. So the fall and winter blends of the biome blend of feed have more constituent ingredients that support liver and kidney function, so that the horse's microbiome has what it needs to help the kidney and liver get the job done, so the horse doesn't stock up and the horse can feel really good throughout the winter.
Yeah, and actually one of my requests is I get the Sainfoin right now through SmartPack, and I want to get the Seasons Biome Blend through SmartPack, and I haven't seen it on there yet because when I was researching all this, and honestly I found the Sainfoin because I was researching diverse options for horses because I have my own little subset of a little sample size of research here on the property, and I'm able to feed them how I think would best help them to grow healthier feet. And so, I'm using the Sainfoin. And then when I was looking at I saw the Seasons Biome Blend, and, I would love to just have the SmartPack free shipping.
Well, I know, right? Because shipping is pound for pound. It's cheaper than our chia, but shipping is awful. And so happy news, good news is that we've been working on bringing this to SmartPack for quite some time. It looks like, if everything goes according to plan, it looks like they will have everything uploaded into their system, so they will be able to start with the winter blend. And we are producing the winter blend on December 23rd.
Oh, great.
So it's right. So, yep. So winter starts in winter. People go, how will I know when the seasons change? Well, it's going to be on the SO tag. It'll have a W for winter, but we're also just following the calendar seasons, right? So winter starts December 21st or thereabouts. Spring comes March 21st. So we will have the winter blend from end of December and early January until March 21st or right around that till the end of March. And then we'll move into the spring. So that's how it'll work. SmartPack is going to bring that on board. They're really excited. We're really excited too. People have been asking us, and we've been trying to do this for months, just months and months. And they're big enough that they get. We have negotiated rates, and believe it or not, our negotiated rates are at least half of what it would charge. It would cost you to ship 40 pounds. If you needed to through the post office, it would be about $80.
Yeah.
But we're not big enough that we have negotiated rates like SmartPack, right? They're giants compared to us. So we're really grateful and excited to be able to partner with them to bring this out, to bring this to more people. It really is a gorgeous food.
Yeah. And I got a sample at Equine Affair, and I fed out the sample to my own mare because she can be kind of picky. So I wanted to see if she would eat it. And obviously she loved it. I mean, it seems like it's a nice feed. But obviously it wasn't enough to really see a change. It was only, I think it was like a 2-pound bag.
Yeah.
So, but I've been waiting until it's on SmartPack to get a full bag, but I do want to see it. I do want to get it and see, some changes that I can see with my herd here, because, I've done, like I said, for 10 years, I've done testing the hay and balancing the minerals to the hay test and making sure that the diet is, curated to grow a healthier foot. And I do see improvements, but I think that I could see more, if that makes sense. And I think that the gut microbiome is sort of like the last, or one of the last steps that I really want to tackle to get these horses as healthy as I can, to the best of my ability,
Yep. So, and so you're sort of on the same path as me, right? I mean, you start to look at it and you go, well, the feed looked better. That's better than it was. But what am I missing?
Right.
And we have all these places you can go online now and you can balance all of the nutrients, and you'll still see people write, I have everything balanced, it's perfect. Why is my horse still skinny? Or why is my horse still fat? Or why does my horse still have, poor feet? Well, it's very possible that the answer lies in the microbiome and in diversification of the diet.
Right. Yeah.
It's amazing. So you have thyme and oregano and a few of these herbs in your refrigerator. And if you buy or even grow your own, when they start to go a little bad and you're thinking of throwing them away, throw them out in the pasture. Let your horse eat them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, actually, on that same vein, do you have any like last minute advice for horse owners that are on this journey as well?
What advice would I have would be, don't just accept information that not even from me that's presented to you. Take the time to dig out answers to your questions. Take the time to go into the veterinary journals or the NIH database, which I love that database, and find those answers to the questions. And the other that I would say is, one of the most disappointing things for me as a horse owner is when I see something in my horse and I know something is wrong and I know what is wrong with my horse, because this might sound crazy, but I feel like my horse tells me. They're good communicators and we have a good relationship. And there are times when there's something wrong and I'm like, yeah, his right hip hurts. And trust your gut. I think that's one of the most important things for horse owners to do, is trust your gut and trust your horse.
Yeah, absolutely.
And follow that, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this is great. And I'm so thankful that you were willing to chat with me. And it was very nice to meet you at Equine Affair. And I'm thankful that you were able to connect and kind of tell me a little bit more, because this has been so fascinating to learn about.
Thank you for having me, Elisa. I mean, it was great when you said, would you be willing? It's absolutely, I would love to. And if people want to reach out to us and find us, we're just at StableFeed.com. We are a super small company. So when you call, it's either me, I'm the owner of the company, or Olivia, who has been with me for 5 years, that answers the phone. There are only 5 people here. So it's a very small company. We love what we do. We love to talk to horse owners and help answer questions when we can.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your night.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye. I always say that I'm slightly more hoof obsessed than the average person, and chances are, if you're listening to a hoof care podcast, you are too. So we should probably be friends. Feel free to find me on Facebook or email me at thehumblehoof@gmail.com.